This is a group project about the rape of Nanking. The members of the group are Cauane, Cardoso de Araujo, Kevin, Garroway, and Mahek Sandhu. In this project, we're gonna talk about the rape of Nanking. We're gonna present the scenario before Japanese invade China, and we're gonna talk about their relationship, the motives for the Japanese actions. We're gonna talk about if China tried to defend themselves and if they had some help. We're gonna present a map with some chronological facts, and by the end we're gonna talk about some consequences for Japan. I hope you guys enjoy it. Rape of Nanking was an episode of mass murder in China committed by the Japanese in 1937 and 1938. This event is the most traumatic of the Second Sino-Japanese War, fought between Japan and China. The massacre lasted 6 weeks and began when the Japanese landed in Nanking, which was the Chinese capital at the time. About 200,000 people died, 20,000 women were raped and killed, including girls under 10. Until today, the event is traumatic for the Chinese and controversial for the Japanese, who downplay the atrocities and do not assume most of the crimes committed. China had been in a civil war since 1926. This war was between communists led by Mao Zedong and nationalists. Since China was a weakened country, foreign powers controlled some of its regions. Japan dominated Manchuria and advanced into Chinese territory when it observed that the nationalists were preparing to confront it. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Chinese resistance. In 1937, the Japanese attacked the coast of China. They conquered Shanghai after 4 months of fighting, leaving 250,000 Chinese dead against 40,000 Japanese. The Chinese went to Nanking, destroying anything on their way that could help Japanese troops. Japan surrounded the capital, and on December 5th, it entered the city. The commander of Chinese troops in Nanjing, General Tang Chengzihe, recruited 100,000 troops in the city to try to contain the Japanese advance. After violent clashes, the Japanese tore down the capital's defenses in 8 days of fighting. In this map, you can see the dates that the Japanese invaded Shanxi, and then when they captured Nanking, and the period of the rape of Nanking, and that goes from December 13th, 1937 to January 31st, 1938. Now we're gonna talk a little bit about the Japanese accountability. It is important to mention that nothing happened with the people who provoked all this massacre until 1945. That was when Japan surrendered during the World War II. So those in charge of Japanese troops in Nanking were put on trial and sentenced to death. So one of them is the Matsui Iwani, and he was a Japanese general who ordered the destruction of Nanking. And so Iwani was tried and ultimately found guilty and executed. He was judged by the International Military Tribunal of the Far East. His ashes were confiscated. However, he was later enshrined at the Yasukuni Shrine. So when you talk about the Japanese and Chinese relationship, we find some controversies. So in a research that we did, a poll between the two countries in 2016 asking citizens about their opinions on the other country revealed that not more than 15% of the citizens had a favorable opinion of the other nation, which is a kind of understandable because of what happened and they are traumatized about it. On the other hand, a trade between the countries tells a different story. Japan is China's second largest trading partner, and China is Japan's largest trading partner. So we can see that they have a close economic relationship. What role did Japanese culture play in provoking the genocide? There is no cultural role behind this massacre besides the point that Japan thought that they had to educate the Chinese. In his article called Justification and Opposition of Mass Killing, Black Sun, the Nanking Massacre, Lung Hu talks about the Japanese idea that the Japan had to educate the Chinese and transform China by killing its people in order to pursue a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere led by Japan. Women of all ages, including children and the elderly, were raped and violated. As a result of Japan's idea, hundreds of thousands of people were brutally murdered. Despite this, Japan continues to refuse to acknowledge the tragedy. What role did foreigners play in Nanking during Japanese control of the city? In November 22nd of 1937, the International Committee for the Nanking Safety Zone is organized by a group of foreigners to shelter Chinese refugees. This group was formed for people around America and German and British. Some of them were doctors, some of them were missionaries, and some of them were businessmen. During the massacre, foreigners living in Nanking attempted to save Chinese lives. They established the Nanking Safety Zone, a civilian shelter that provided food, shelter, and medical care. This shelter saved around 250,000 lives. So, in conclusion, for all of this, why this genocide occurred? To crush moral of the Chinese. In the Constitutional Rights Foundation, it's written that Japanese military and political leaders believed that it was Japan's destiny to acquire China. Japan wanted to take over China, and they thought a good way to do this was to break the spirits of the Chinese. This was one of the most traumatic things that happened in China, and as I said before, Japanese don't acknowledge the size of this tragedy. So those are the sources that we used to produce our video. Some of these sources were recommended for our professor and some are are external funds. Thank you.